Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm truly grateful that you have chosen to spend some of your very valuable time with me as I talk about a book that has been, I think, really one of the biggest BookTube darlings of the past couple of years, especially amongst the fantasy reading crowd, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Now, I don't always agree with popular opinions about things, so let's get into this and see what I thought of this very popular book. So before I even got started with reading this book, I immediately knew I was in for something good when I was glancing over some of the quotes that people had left regarding this book. And the first one that's on the front page here is quite possibly the greatest feel-good story ever to involve the Antichrist. And that was written by Shelf Awareness. And I thought, that sounds great. I am definitely ready for this. So as I got into it, I realized that this kind of sense of humor definitely carried on throughout the book. It was a pleasant, enjoyable read. I was actually surprised at what a simple read it was. I guess I hadn't noticed that it's classified as a young adult book, and it has been many, many years, I think, since I've read a YA book. So when I was reading it, certainly the writing style was, I would say, simplistic, but not bad. It was a simple writing style, but it was well written at the same time, if that makes sense. So when I sort of talk about this light tone and this humor that's pervasive throughout the book, here is one really quick example. It's a conversation between our main character, Linus Baker, and another character. So Linus says, "I'm Linus Baker." She squinted at him. "I remember you." "Okay. I thought you died or something." "No, not yet." So I definitely appreciated that, but in reading some of the comments on Goodreads, it seems that at least one person took offense to it, because this person stated that they heard that the author, T.J. Klune, had been inspired to write this story based on hearing about Canada's treatment of Indigenous peoples and the residential school system. So this book is all about a man named Linus who works for an organization that oversees orphanages, and in particular, their area of interest is in orphanages who take in children who have magical abilities. And so these children are not really accepted in wider society because of their difference in terms of their abilities and the fact that they are made up of races of people who are more or less fantasy creatures, such as gnomes, wyverns, even the Antichrist himself. So when these children are born and their differences become known, they're sort of shipped off to these orphanages where they are sort of removed from society and kept in their own little spaces. And so based on that premise, I can see how the author might have taken inspiration from the residential school system. And I can also understand why this particular reviewer took such great umbrage to the fact that the author would take this aspect of history, which truly represents humanity at its very, very worst. If you know anything at all about that history, it's just mind-bogglingly horrendous, and took that history and turned it into this sort of light, fluffy, humorous fantasy story. And so, while I do understand that commenter's point of view, I get why that would leave a bad taste in their mouth. I think that the book itself, being the fantasy story it is so far removed from real-life history that I think that book can be enjoyed for its own merits and for the positive lessons that it imparts. And despite its simplistic writing style, it does get into some things that are worth thinking about. For example here, this little statement about the main character, it says, "He didn't have time to sit in silence and think such frivolous thoughts. Sometimes silence was the loudest thing of all," which is something that people who tend to live within their own heads can definitely relate to. And then here's another example. Again, dealing with our character Linus, "She looked at him again for longer than Linus felt was safe. 'You don't look like I expected.' He didn't know what to do with that. He'd never really been seen before. What's that supposed to mean?" "That you look unexpected." think there's a lot in that statement that he'd never been seen before. We live in a society where loneliness is rampant despite all of our online connection, because so much of it is this superficial Instagram, social media world, and we are not really truly seen much of the time. As the book goes on, it dives deeper into some of these issues. And it really does even shine some light into some dark corners of life. Here are a few examples of that. There's another conversation happening, and the character says, "I can respect that. While we may be unconventional, I expect you'll see that I will do anything to keep them safe. As I said previously, the world is a weird and wonderful place, but that doesn't mean it's not without its teeth, and it will bite you when you least expect it." Speaking of the world and its view of things, I really like what it has to say in this next bit, where a character named Arthur, who oversees one of these orphanages that is the main topic of the book, and Arthur is saying, "My point remains the same as it is in my sessions with Lucy. The world likes to see things in black and white, in moral and immoral, but there is gray in between. And just because a person is capable of wickedness doesn't mean they will act upon it." And then there is the notion of perceived immorality, and he goes on. And I think this is a point that I come to over and over again in my life, where people naturally are wired to see things in black and white. That's just the way we are with our makeup for whatever reason, whatever evolutionary benefit that gives us, that's kind of the way humans are. But the real world, real life, is just full of gray scales. There is hardly ever black and white involved. Here's another place where the book actually addresses this issue. This time Linus is having a conversation with another character, and that character says, "Regardless of whether or not you like to hear it," Jowell said, "he is still what he is. That can never change." "It can't?" Linus retorted. "I refuse to believe that. We are who we are not because of our birthright, but because of what we choose to do in this life. It cannot be boiled down to black and white. Not when there is so much in between. You cannot say something is moral or immoral without understanding the nuances behind it." That really hits the nail on the head, both with that particular issue, and I really like what he said about we are what we choose to do. And that's just another thing that I have really been so emphatic about over the years, is what we are is not what we believe. It is not even what we profess to be. It is what we choose to do in life. It's our actions that define the person we are. If I say I'm a non-violent person, but then I go out and pick fights with people every time I leave the house, I'm a violent person. It's not who I think I am. It's not who I say I am. It's what I do who defines who I am as a person. So I really like that particular passage. Before I go on and finish up here, I just wanted to pause for a quick second and send out a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who just make it possible for me to keep on spending those hours editing videos and getting this content out despite everything else that's happening in my life. A special big thank you goes out to my higher tier Patreon supporters, Joanna, Osmondas Pervect, Paul, Mojo Dam, and just a huge thank you to everybody who has taken the time to support me in that way. It means more than I can say, so thank you so much. And now back to the house in the Cerulean Sea. So, despite what I have to say about these kind of deeper issues that the book does cover, the overall sort of theme of the book is a little bit simplistic, in that the theme is kind of, just because somebody is different doesn't mean we should treat them differently. So just because these children turn out to be fantasy creatures with magical abilities, special ways of interacting in the world, doesn't mean they should be treated differently and separated from society and put in their own little corner where people don't have to think about them. In other words, bigotry is bad. That's the message of this book, and it's a good message. And while I tend to feel that it reads kind of young, and it is for this young adult audience, when I go on the internet, I certainly see a myriad of examples of adults who need to hear the message that bigotry is bad. These final few examples that I'm going to read from the book sort of help to highlight these ideas too. He looked younger in person, far younger than his 45 years suggested. He was as fresh-faced as the young people who came into the office with their shiny degrees and ideas about how things should be done rather than how they actually were. They quickly learned to fall in line. Idealism had no place in government work. I'm not even going to get into government-related issues. Let's just move on to what I was saying about the main themes of the book here. Here Linus is trying to encourage one of the children who's in the orphanage, and he says, "It's not fair," Linus said, staring off into nothing, "the way some people can be. But as long as you remember to be just and kind, like I know you are, what those people think won't matter in the long run. Hate is loud, but I think you'll learn it's because it's only a few people shouting, desperate to be heard. You might not ever be able to change their minds, but as long as you remember you're not alone, you will overcome." And isn't that so true? We live in a world where the shouted hatred of the minority is what gets all the attention, the media coverage, the clicks and views on social media and the internet platforms. It is this shouting rabble that gets all the attention when they should be put in their place, generally ignored, and we ought to allow the majority who genuinely love and accept their fellow humans to be the ones whose voices are heard. And speaking of that, here's the final one that I'll read. Linus is speaking again and says, "You can fire me, you can try and have me censured, but I will not stop. Change starts with the voices of the few. I will be one of those few because they taught me how, and I know that I'm not alone." And when those few have the courage to speak against the hatred and the bigotry and all that stuff, then the rest of the people who are the majority of good people will have the courage to also, I think, stick up for that hatred. So that's a great message in this book. But what did I think of it as a whole, and what do I rate it? On my notes here, I wrote 7 out of 10, but in thinking about it as I talk about the book, I think I need to bump that up slightly to 7.5 out of 10 as a final rating. It's a delightful book. It's a beautiful love story. It has a great positive message. It's written in a very approachable manner that can be read by anyone from teens to adults. It's certainly not something that totally blew me away. Like I said, it was all just kind of straightforward and enjoyable. But on the whole, this is a book that I would recommend in people checking out if they are interested in a nice easy read that has some humor, some positive messages, and a touching male-male romance, which I thought was rather sweet as well. So what about you? What have you been reading lately? Please do let me know down below. I'm always interested, as you know, in hearing what you're reading and what you're recommending these days. So please do take the time to let me know. And thank you so much for watching. Hey, it's Josh. You know why I'm here. Sometimes you just need that friendly reminder to give a little thumb up, to subscribe to the channel, to share the video with somebody who would enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm truly grateful that you have chosen. And as I got into it, in reading some of the comments on, it's a book review website, for fuck's sake. But in reading some of the comments on Goodreads, and it really does. The world likes to see things in black and white. We are not hit. We are, and we shall